We are having foreign presenters, and they will speak in English. The questions can be made in the end in Portuguese, and we can translate it. We have a colleague here that can support us with that. And now we are getting further with the discussions with John Croft, talking a bit about his experiences in development of alternative projects and initiatives around the world. And after that, we have Marcelo talking about transition towns. And the two last presentations will be about two very important books that are being released in Brazil. And it's Professor Ortega and Professor Felipe Renat who are going to present. I give the word to my friend John.
Thank you. And I want to thank the degrowth movement here for the chance to speak with you this afternoon. I want to ask a question before we start. If I was to talk as slowly as this, how many people here would have difficulty understanding my English? What I'd like to ask then is if you could sit next to somebody who does understand English, and if you have difficulty understanding what I'm saying, nudge that person and say, "What did he say?" So that's the start. I come from Western Australia. It's the most isolated city on the world. We are further from everywhere than everywhere. And what that means is that we never hear about, or we never see what's happening in the rest of the world. We only hear about it. But what we hear about is the publicity about what's happening in the rest of the world. We never see the reality. And so, we always think we were behind the rest of the world and we have to catch up. And so we have been working with degrowth through an organisation in Western Australia for 25 years. That's one thing. The second thing is that being in Perth, Western Australia, we know that there's no one else in the world who's worried about what's happening in Perth, Western Australia.
Yes,
so
some
we know.
people know.
So we know that if anything is going to happen, we have to do it for ourselves. We can't depend on anyone else. And this has created a kind of work that, like permaculture, is now spreading right around the world. In 25 years, the work of the Gaia Foundation of Western Australia has run more than 650 projects. We haven't yet had a single project that's failed. And there's a reason for that. Because we have discovered a way of running incredibly successful projects. Now, that method since 2006 was taken to Totnes in Devon, where the first transition town started. In 2006, when Totnes was the only transition town, I ran a workshop with Rob Hopkins there, explaining this method, and they adopted a lot of the ideas of this method into the transition movement. As a result, the transition town movement has now spread right around the world, and it's estimated that there are over 3,000 communities now doing transition. That's from 1 to 3,000 in 6 years. This method has also now been used to train more than 500 people in Europe. There are now over 70 trainers in Europe, and there's more than 250 projects using this method now in Europe. I was invited to come to Brazil last November. I ran workshops in Porto Alegre, in Sao Paulo, in Minas Gerais, in Belo Horizonte, in Rio. And as a result of that, there are now between 50 and 100 people trained in this method in Brazil. And there's people in Brazil that are starting to use this method. And I would guess there's probably somewhere between 25 and 30 projects now in Brazil that are using parts of this method. The method now is used from Finland in the north to South Africa. It's used from Ireland to Russia. It's used in Turkey and Sri Lanka. And it's spreading very fast. Now I want to share this method with you today because I think this method has got answers to a lot of the questions that I heard people talking about here this afternoon in terms of the degrowth movement. Before I go on, one of the things I want to share with you is that degrowth is inevitable. It is going to happen. We have no choice. But where we have a choice is the way in which it happens. And there are basically two different ways in which degrowth are going to happen. One way is to wait until it happens automatically. We're already seeing degrowth happen automatically in Greece, in Portugal, in Spain. It's happening now. That's one way it can happen. The second way, and this is the way of the transition movement, is to say degrowth is going to happen, but we can plan now so that the effects of degrowth, the negative effects, are going to be minimized. We have an opportunity now, a window of opportunity before degrowth starts to happen. At this time, because it's not yet started, we can be creative. But when it happens, and you have no choice, people are struggling to survive, like they are in Greece. And when you're struggling to survive, you cannot be creative. You tend just to do what has to be done. And that can lead to pretty ugly sort of things happening. So, how do we make a difference? How do we get this kind of creativity? Because I believe that degrowth is going to take all of us. There's no one who's yet found the answer. But when I say all of us, it's going to take all that we can to do it. All of our skills, all of our abilities, all of our knowledge, all of our wisdom, of all of us. There is no one yet who has the 100% answer. But what we need to do is to stimulate creativity on a scale that has never been tried anywhere on earth before. Now, how do we stimulate creativity? Just briefly, there are 7 things we need to do. The first one is build community. Build community wherever you are living, in your street, in your city, in your neighbourhood, in your place of work. Build community. People who are living in a supportive and caring community will suffer the least. The people who are isolated and not living in a supportive community and sharing community will suffer the most. That's number 1. Number 2, simplify your life. You see at the moment things are going faster and faster. And complexity is now reducing the quality of our lives. To increase the quality of your life now, you need to reduce complexity. And the way to do that is to simplify. That will give you time back again. But you will only be able to get time back if you are living in a supportive and caring community. Number 3, maximize creativity. You will only be able to maximize creativity if you have time. That's why you need to simplify your life, because that will give you the time to be creative. And it's creativity that's going to find answers to the problems of our time. Answers to the problems of peak oil, answers to the problems of climate change, and answers to the problems of economic crisis. So that's number 3. Number 4, practice non-violence. One of the things that happens in these sorts of times, especially if you've got no time, people react with violence. You can see it happening in Greece at the moment. You cannot fight violence with violence. It only makes matters worse. We need to practice non-violence in our families, in our districts, in our communities, in our regions, in our countries, and between countries. That's number 4. Non-violence creates the possibility of creativity. Number 5. What happens at times like this, particularly with losing time, is wisdom disappears. When wisdom disappears, people confuse wisdom with knowledge. But wisdom is not knowledge, it's different. And then they confuse knowledge with understanding. And then they confuse understanding with information. It's not the same. And then they confuse information with data. And we have a lot of data at the moment. It's not information. And then data disappears and just becomes noise. So, number 5 is we need to preserve wisdom. I don't know what it's like in Brazil, but at the moment worldwide we are losing one language every 2 weeks. When we lose a language, we lose the ecological understanding on which that language was based. The Eskimo language has got 20 different words for snow. If we lose the Eskimo language, we lose a profound understanding of snow, and it will take us 1,000 years to recover that information. We need to preserve knowledge and wisdom. Number 6. What happens at a time like this, we get the rise of warring fundamentalisms. What we need is to replace dogma with an understanding of the mystery of life. And it needs to be based on an understanding of the earth itself. We need a spirituality that is earth-based. We need a spirituality that is inclusive of difference and not exclusive. The word religion comes from the Latin. It means relink. What we have at the moment is a lot of so-called religions that are deligions. They disconnect. We need to build reconnection. And we can do that philosophically, ethically, and spiritually. And number 7, we need a financial system that supports the other 6. At the moment, we've got financial systems that cannot economize. We've got an economy that cannot economize. The economy at the moment is based on debt and not on savings. And because it's based on debt, what we are doing is we are changing the living ecology of the planet into money. And that cannot continue. Any culture that destroys its own life support system and calls that progress is insane. And people living in such a culture, for most of the time, are part of that insanity. What we call normality at the moment, with consumerism and with consumption and with all the things that we associate with that, is a form of insanity. And in that insanity, to be sane is to be abnormal. Now, what I want to show you now is a way of breeding that immortality, that abnormality. And the way in which to do that is to create thousands of small projects in which they do those 7 things that I suggested. And this is what the transition movement and other movements like permaculture, like the eco-villages, like deep ecology, like dragon dreaming, which is what we call this method, are doing at the moment worldwide. Now, how do we do that? And I want to show you how to do that in the rest of the time of my talk. What we see, every project ever done in the world, no matter what the project is, starts as the dream of a single person. 90% of projects get stuck there. The reason why is that every project ever done has to occur in an environment. And so what the project really is a dialogue between you and the world. It's an encounter where the self meets the other. And here is the project. Now, in this project, at the start of the project, the individual has to contribute their time, their knowledge, their skills, their information, their wisdom, their understanding, their money, their resources. It all has to come from the individual at the start. But if this project is going to be successful, that needs to mobilize resources from the environment. Other people, other wisdoms, other knowledge has to come into the project. Now I'm going to make you a promise. If you do a dragon dreaming project in this way, when this project is outrageously successful, what will happen is this project will transform you as an individual. You will discover things about yourself that you don't know you don't know. You will develop skills and abilities that at the moment you don't even realise exist. Your project will transform you. But if the project is sustainable, what will happen is this project will also transform the environment. You'll be living in a different world as a result of doing a successful project like this. Between the individual and the environment, there is an interface, a threshold, a living membrane. And what happens at the start of your project is your project is displaced right across here. This membrane is right across here, which means that 90% of the work of your project has to come from the individual. But when your project is successful, this interface will move right across here. 90% of the work will be coming from the environment. So in the life of your project, this interface moves backwards and forwards. Now, what does that mean? It means that this is a one-dimensional framework for a model of a successful project. And for this, we need a second dimension. Now, the second dimension comes from the work of a Brazilian, Paulo Freire. He said that the truly successful projects are those projects that integrate theory with practice. Now, what does that mean? It means when you start to do your project, you start with a theory. But when you engage with your environment, that will change your theory. And the same thing happens with practice. At the start of the project, your practice is in the environment. But what happens as you engage with the environment through your practice, that will change the practice of the individual. Now, again there is a membrane between the two. And this membrane, again, is a living membrane. What does that mean? It means that when you start your project, and this is true of every project ever done, that membrane is right down here. As the project grows, the practice grows, and so that membrane moves up here. So this too is a movable living membrane. This is the framework for every successful project ever done. There isn't a single project anywhere in the world that doesn't in some way use this framework. Now, there's a process that fits this framework, and I want to share what that process is. We have a false idea about the nature of intelligence. We think intelligence is something that's in the head, and it is not. Intelligence is the process that connects the individual to the world and connects the world back to the individual. It's a circular process. And as a result of that circular process, there are 4 steps. The first step to creating an outrageously successful project. Every project starts with a dream. And it's the dream of one person. 90% of projects that don't use dragon dreaming get stuck in the dreaming stage. They don't go any further than the dream. And the reason why is because people do not share their dreams. The first step to making your dream come true is to share your dream. And you need to build a team around your dream that will support you in doing your project. Step number 1. Step number 2 is you need to take your dream and turn it into a plan. But 90% of plans don't work because there is too much of a separation between the planning and the doing of the project. What happens? The planners try and take control. They try and get the doers to follow their plan. And the doers say the plan is completely out of touch with reality, they don't know what they're talking about. Conventional planning just creates 2 groups of people who can blame each other when it goes wrong. Now, we have found that 90% of projects don't last longer than 3 years. What does that mean? It means for every 1,000 dreams, only 100 get turned into plans. Of the 100, only 10 get done. Of the 10 that get done, there is only 1 that lasts longer than 3 years. What a waste of dream. Part of the reason why is you leave out the 4th step. And the 4th step to making your dreams come true is to build in celebration. Celebration needs to be 25% of every project. 25% of the cost of every project needs to be celebration. Imagine telling that to the government of Brazil. Dreaming, planning, doing and celebrating is the way to make your dreams come true. This is the way if the degrowth movement in Brazil is going to be successful. This is the way to build successful projects at every level. One of the things that we're doing in Brazil is that next February I'm coming to Brazil and I'm going to be working in this country for 3.5 months, setting up projects, working with people, training them in this method. If you're interested, I'd like to introduce these 2 people, Felipe and Flavia, if you'd like to stand up for a moment. These people are part of a team that is using this method to organise workshops that will stretch from Amazonia in the north right down to here and a whole lot of other places as well. This is, I believe, the way to do it. This is the way to build a strong, dynamic and growing degrowth movement in Brazil. Thank you very much.
We're going to move forward with the presentation of transition towns, and then